I once believed that I was in control of everything. From a young age, I was taught that with effort and intelligence, I could achieve anything I wanted. The world as I saw it was just one giant playground, and the strong and clever would win. God, to me, he was just a beautiful figure in books, a fairy tale made up to comfort the weak and helpless. I didn't need God. I believed I was strong enough to stand on my own. I pursued money, status, and beneficial relationships. Every time I reached a goal, I felt proud, as if I were proving to the whole world, see, I don't need anyone to guide me. My life revolved around all-night parties, opportunistic handshakes, and fleeting pleasures. By day, I was a busy person, always in a hurry, wearing a mask of success. By night, I was a pleasure seeker, trying to forget the vague emptiness in my heart. I didn't want to name that emptiness, because that would be like admitting I was missing something. But then, the bricks of the empire I had built began to crumble. A few bad business decisions cost me important contracts. The people I thought were my friends turned out to be there only when I was useful to them. The romantic relationship I had placed so much hope in also fell apart, leaving a dull ache in me. I started drinking more, throwing myself into meaningless pleasures to forget my failures. I thought I could hide everything with a smile and jokes, but inside I was in free fall. I didn't realize that my arrogance had led me down a dark path, where all light of hope seemed to disappear. I still believed I could find my own way out. I still repeated the phrase, "I'm fine," every time someone asked how I was. But deep down, I knew I was getting closer to an abyss. And the most terrifying thing was, I wasn't afraid. Sin never came like a sudden, furious, and obvious storm. It was like a thin mist, silently seeping into every crack of my life. At first, I thought I was still in control. The wrong things I did were just small things, harmless lies, bending the rules to get what I wanted. But I didn't realize that every time I compromised, a part of my conscience died a little. I started to justify my actions. Everyone does it. It's just a small thing. No one will know, so it's fine. Each of those sentences became a free pass I gave myself. And strangely, the things that used to make me restless and lose sleep no longer bothered me. My heart grew cold, and my conscience gradually fell silent. Then the small things were no longer enough to satisfy me. I moved on to bigger, riskier, more sinful decisions. I lied more, deceived more skillfully, and covered up better. I started playing a dangerous game with my own conscience. Every time I succeeded in fooling others, I felt like a winner. But in reality, I was losing and losing badly. On the outside, I appeared strong, confident, and in control of everything. I could laugh, joke, and even advise others to live a good life. But inside, I knew I was rotting. The emptiness grew, like a deep black hole in my soul. I tried to fill it with pleasure, money, and fleeting relationships. But the more I tried to fill it, the deeper it got. I thought I was enjoying freedom, the freedom to do what I wanted without anyone's judgment. But looking back now, that wasn't freedom. It was a form of invisible chains. Every wrong choice was a new link wrapped around me. Every compromise was a tighter knot. And one day I realized I was completely bound. No one else was imprisoning me. It was my own decisions. There were late nights when the noise outside quieted down, and I lay in the darkness and heard my own heartbeat clearly. In those quiet moments, a vague voice echoed, "Where are you going?" I hated that voice because it forced me to confront the truth, that I had lost myself. But instead of turning back, I chose to keep going, hoping I would find another way out. I didn't know that the deeper I went down the path of sin, the further away the way out became. The day I was arrested, the cold clink of the handcuffs rang out like a bell ending all the illusions I had clung to. That sound not only locked my hands, but also seemed to slam the door on my years of freedom, even though I had actually lost my freedom long ago. Right from the moment I let sin lead my life, I was escorted through a crowded street. Their eyes were on me, eyes of pity, contempt, and curiosity. Every step was a knife cutting deep into my already tattered self-respect. I tried to hold my head high, pretending to be strong, but inside my heart was trembling. When the cell door slammed shut, I fully felt the coldness. The gray walls, low ceiling, and dim light made the space even more suffocating. On the damp cement floor were a few old mats, smelling of mold. I sat down in a corner, trying to avoid eye contact with the strangers in the room. The first night, I couldn't sleep. The sounds of sighs, a dry cough, and a stifled sob from somewhere echoed in the darkness. Every sound seemed to drag me deeper into a reality I didn't want to face. Fear began to creep in. The fear of a person with nowhere to run, no choices left, and no idea what the future held. I started to remember every step I had taken, from the small compromises to the spiral of bigger sins. I had always thought I was in control of everything, but in fact, I was the one being controlled. Sin was like a strong current, and I had let myself drift with it without resisting. In the darkness of the cell, I asked myself, how did I end up like this? What did I miss on the path of life to fall here? But the more I tried to find an answer, the more I realized I had no one to blame but myself. The handcuffs today were not the only punishment. They were also a symbol of a soul that had been imprisoned for a long time. That night, I fell into a fitful sleep, where past, present, and future were all mixed up. And when I woke up, I understood that this was just the beginning of a darker journey. But I also couldn't have imagined that this very prison would be the place where the first seeds of true freedom would later be sown. In prison, time passed so slowly it felt suffocating. Every morning began with the shrill clang of the bell echoing through the cold corridor. We lined up, bowed our heads, and walked out to the workyard to the steady sound of shoes hitting the cement floor. The sun was no longer a warm light, but just a faint shadow behind a thin layer of fog, casting cold yellow streaks onto the yard. The work was hard and monotonous, shoveling dirt, carrying bricks, sweeping. Every breath, every drop of sweat seemed to be trapped within the four walls. But it was when night fell that the real prison began. The iron door slammed shut, the sound long and harsh, like a sentence being pronounced over and over again. In the cell, no one spoke. Perhaps everyone understood that words were useless, or that a slip of the tongue would bring trouble. The ceiling fan creaked, the footsteps of the night guard occasionally echoed, and then disappeared. The rest was just silence, so silent that I could hear my own heartbeat and my own hurried breathing. In that silence, another sound echoed, the sound of conscience. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent. It replayed the faces I had hurt, the look in my mother's eyes when I lied, the trembling hands of the friend I betrayed, the choked voice of an ex-girlfriend I abandoned without explanation. Each memory was like a knife twisting deeper into my mind. I realized that I wasn't just imprisoned by iron bars, but also chained by the sins that had accumulated throughout my life. Some nights I lay still looking at the stained ceiling, trying to sleep but couldn't. My eyes wide open in the darkness, I felt as if the room was shrinking, the air thick and heavy, so heavy that every breath was a struggle. I used to think I was strong, but here, that strength vanished. All that was left was a naked man confronting himself, with nowhere to run, no excuses to make. I began to ask myself, if I die here tomorrow, what will my life have left behind? Just a long list of mistakes or something else? The question had no answer, only leaving a vast emptiness in my heart. Yet that very emptiness began to create a new need, a longing to be freed, not just from prison, but from the yoke of sin that had clung to me for so many years. I didn't know how, and I didn't know what true freedom looked like. But in those suffocating silent nights, a strange thought began to flicker. If there was a chance to live differently, I would take it, at all costs. One morning, like every other morning, I was sitting in the corner of the cell, quietly watching the sunlight filter through the bars, when another inmate came closer. He was a man of few words, with deep eyes, who was often silent as if he held many secrets. Without saying hello, he handed me a thin book, its cover so frayed it was almost peeling off. I frowned. "What's this?" "Just read it. Maybe you'll find something." I turned the cover. New Testament. The printed words were faded but still recognizable. I almost laughed out loud. A thought flashed in my mind. Religion? Probably another fairy tale to comfort the weak. I was about to give it back, but his eyes didn't leave me. Not forcing, just quietly waiting. Finally, I reluctantly kept the book, thinking to myself, well, it's something to pass the time. I opened it randomly. My eyes stopped at a bolded sentence. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. John 8:36. I let out a small laugh. Freedom? I looked around. The 4 damp walls, the cold iron bars, the locked door. I was in the harshest prison of my life. How could there be freedom here? Yet all day long, those words echoed in my head like an echo in an empty room. In the evening, when everyone was asleep, I lay on the thin mat, my eyes on the dark ceiling, and the sentence appeared again. If the Son sets you free, I began to ask myself, who is the Son here? Freed from what? From prison, or from other things I haven't dared to name? I tried to shake it off, but the more I tried to forget, the more deeply the words were etched, as if someone was carving into an old piece of wood in my mind. The next day I opened the book again, this time reading a few pages around that verse. The words there were strange, not like a philosophy book, and not like the moral lessons I had heard as a child. There was something both gentle and powerful, both direct, that made me feel scrutinized deep within. I didn't understand it all, but each word seemed to have its own weight. It didn't just talk about laws or punishments, but also about another kind of freedom, something that iron bars, chains, or prison couldn't touch. An inner freedom deeper than anything I had ever known. That evening, I told the story to my inmate friend. He just smiled and said, "True freedom isn't about getting out of here. It begins when you are no longer chained inside." I was silent. I didn't believe it yet, but I also couldn't deny that a very small flame had just been lit in my heart. Enough for me to want to keep reading, to want to find out who the Son was, and whether the freedom he spoke of truly existed for someone like me. One evening, the cell was in silence. The pale yellow light shone down on the cold cement floor. I sat with my back against the wall, the thin Bible in my hand. The pages were crumpled, some were yellowed as if they had been in the hands of many people for decades. I don't know why I opened it, but my hand kept turning the pages, my eyes following the words as if someone was guiding me. I read about Jesus, a man with no political power, no wealth, but who changed the world. He touched a leper without fear of being unclean. He healed the blind, the lame, and even raised the dead. But what made me stop the longest was not the miracles, but how he treated sinners. I read about the woman caught in adultery. The crowd wanted to stone her to death. They turned to Jesus, wanting him to agree with the verdict. But he just said, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." The crowd was silent, and then one by one, they left. Finally, he said to her, "I do not condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." I was stunned. A question echoed in my heart. If he did not condemn that woman, could he forgive me? I turned to the passage about the 2 thieves crucified with Jesus. One of them mocked him, but the other said, "We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he turned and said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." I felt as if I was that thief, sinful, helpless, with nothing left to defend myself. I was also being crucified in a prison of cement and steel and had nothing left to lose. A thought suddenly flashed. If he could forgive that person, why couldn't he forgive me? I don't know what to call it, an intuition, a whisper, or a call from deep within. But that night I put the Bible down, bowed my head, and for the first time in my life, I talked to God. I don't know if you are real. I don't know how to pray, but if you can hear me, please help me. I have destroyed my life and hurt many people. I cannot save myself. Please forgive me. My tears began to fall. They were not tears of anger or despair, but a strange relief, as if an invisible burden was being lifted from my shoulders. In the cold cell, I felt a strange warmth. No one touched me, but I knew I had been touched. That night, I no longer read the Bible as an ancient book. I read it as a person searching for life, and for the first time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, Jesus was also searching for me. That night, my rented room was plunged into thick darkness. The streetlights outside only filtered through a crack in the door, creating faint streaks of light on the cold cement floor. I sat in silence for a long time, feeling as if every breath was heavy and weary. In my head, negative voices echoed incessantly, urging me to end it all. I had been in this state for many days, many months, to the point where I no longer remembered the last time I felt I want to live. But that night there was something different. It wasn't that I suddenly had faith. It wasn't that I suddenly became strong. It was just that, at the bottom of my despair, I felt I had nothing left to lose. I remembered a few stories I had vaguely heard about God, that He is the one who can save people who have no way out. I didn't know if it was just a fairy tale or the truth, but I thought if it was true, then this was the only time I needed to know. I slowly knelt down on the cold cement floor. My hands trembled as I placed them on the floor. The cold seeped into my knees, but it didn't make me more alert. It just made me clearly aware that I was in a very dark, very empty place, both outside and inside. I didn't know what prayer was. I had never been taught what words to say, what titles to use. I just bowed my head slightly and spoke out loud, my voice almost a whisper. If God is really real, please save me. That's all. Not long, not flowery, but every word was the naked truth of my heart. I waited. Nothing happened. There was no brilliant light, no sound of heavenly music, no thunder or strong wind like in the movies. But slowly, something very difficult to describe began to flood my heart. At first, I thought it was just a hallucination because I was so tired. But the feeling spread, gentle as a warm stream. It chased away the tension, lifted a part of the burden I had been carrying for so long. I felt lighter, not because the problems had disappeared. They were still there, intact. But there was a strange peace, as if someone had placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You are not alone." I sat in that feeling for a long time. Tears began to fall, but this time they were not tears of despair. They fell because I couldn't understand why. In the middle of the dark night, in the cold, amidst all the emptiness, a ray of hope could seep into my heart like this. I crawled into bed, a small, old bed with a frayed blanket. I didn't want anything else. I just wanted to hold on to this feeling for as long as possible. For the first time in many months, I fell into a sleep without nightmares chasing me. No more gloomy images. No more self-destructive scenarios. Just a deep and peaceful sleep. The next morning, I woke up in a strange state. I no longer felt so heavy that I couldn't get out of bed. The sadness was still there, but it was no longer a rock pressing on my chest. I remembered my prayer from last night and suddenly asked myself, did He hear? That question stayed with me all day. I didn't dare to claim it, but I also couldn't deny the feeling I had experienced. And a small thought popped up. If He heard me last night, is He also watching me today? From that day on, I started whispering a few short prayers every night. At first, they were very clumsy, sometimes just sighs. But the more I did it, the more I felt something changing inside me. The despair didn't disappear overnight, but little by little, a small flame was lit. And for me, that was a miracle. That first night of prayer was not just a moment. It was a small door that opened a path I never knew existed. The path that led me to the source of true life. The first morning after that prayer, I woke up without the usual heavy feeling. Before, every time I opened my eyes, it was as if an invisible rock was pressing on my chest, making it an ordeal to get out of bed. But that morning I felt lighter. It wasn't complete joy, but there was a spark, a small one, that seeped into my soul. I found an old Bible that I had been given but had never opened. The pages were yellowed with a faint smell of old paper, but as I turned each page, it was as if a new wind was blowing into my life. At first, I didn't fully understand the meaning of the words. Many times I would read and reread, trying to understand and asking myself why people believed in these things. But there was one thing I couldn't deny. When I read, I felt at peace. Day after day, I maintained that habit. Every morning, instead of rushing for my phone or lying in bed, I would sit down, open the Bible, and let the words sink into my heart. I didn't always have special feelings, but I realized one thing. My mind was gradually being purified. The change started with very small things. I was less angry. Before, just an unpleasant word or something not going my way was enough for me to shout. But now I started to know how to be silent, take a deep breath, and ask myself, if it were God, how would he want me to react? At first, this was difficult. I still made mistakes, still got grumpy sometimes, but each time I felt remorse and asked for forgiveness. Another change was my language. Swearing was almost a part of my daily language before. It came unconsciously, especially when I was upset. But gradually, those words disappeared. No one forced me to stop, but when my soul was renewed, my mouth naturally changed. The people around me started to notice. A few old friends met me and exclaimed, "Hey, why are you so different now?" I smiled, not trying to give a long explanation, just answering, "Because I met God." Of course, not everyone believed. Some laughed mockingly, others shook their heads and said I had been brainwashed. Those words initially hurt me, but then I understood that not everyone is ready to accept change. But there were also people who were genuinely curious. They asked me how I read the Bible, how I prayed, and why I believed. I didn't have an academic answer or a powerful argument. I just told them about the night I knelt down, cried, and asked for help, and about the peace I received. As the days passed, I began to pay more attention to how I lived. Before I could lie to protect myself or do wrong things as long as they were beneficial to me. But now every time I faced such a choice, I heard a gentle reminder in my heart. What will you do to glorify me? That question made me think more carefully before acting. Once I was standing in a supermarket, about to buy something I couldn't afford. The thought crossed my mind that I could cheat at the checkout counter. Before, I wouldn't have hesitated, but at that moment my heart started to beat fast and my hands suddenly trembled. I turned around and returned the item to its shelf. Leaving the supermarket, I felt relieved. No one knew, but I knew, and God also knew. Since the change, my relationship with my family also began to heal. I started to say, "I'm sorry," something I used to see as a weakness. I remember once after an argument with my mother, I went to her and said, "I'm sorry for making you sad." She looked at me stunned, then her eyes welled up with tears. Just one sentence, but it was like breaking down the cold wall between us. In those days, I no longer sought joy in alcohol or fleeting pleasures. Instead, I found joy in spending time with God. Even if it was just an afternoon sitting by the window, reading a few pages of the Bible and watching the late afternoon sun. I realized that true joy is not loud, not showy, but comes from a deep peace in the soul. Not everything was easy. My new faith was like a sprout that had just emerged from dry soil. It was easily blown over by the wind, easily trampled. And just as I feared, the first winds came very early. In the very first days, some of the other inmates in the room started mocking me. They talked among themselves but made sure to speak loud enough for me to hear. "Look at him, suddenly so pious, huh? He's probably just pretending to get a lighter sentence." The sneers, the looks full of suspicion, were all like small knives stabbing my heart. I used to be a tough guy who wouldn't let anyone touch my honor, but now I tried to keep silent. Not because I was weak, but because I didn't want to break the fragile peace that God had just planted in my heart. However, there were nights when the cell lights were out and everyone was snoring. I would lie looking up at the ceiling, wondering, am I just deluding myself? Is this just a fleeting emotion, or is there really a God who is with me? My faith was still so new, without deep roots, that just one question was enough to make me waver. Then the challenges came from my living situation itself. One day, another inmate lost his temper and deliberately picked a fight with me. Before, my reaction would have definitely been to retaliate immediately, even ready to fight. But that day, I just took a deep breath and walked away. I heard curses following me and the laughter of those who witnessed it. I walked into the corner of the room, my heart feeling both relieved and bitter. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing or just showing weakness. Sometimes my silence and calmness were misunderstood by others. A prison officer once stared at me and asked, "What are you up to? Do you really want to be a good person?" The question sounded simple, but it was full of suspicion. It seemed that people were so used to people changing only for self-gain that when they saw someone change for another reason, they couldn't believe it. On such days, I felt like I was swimming against a strong current, tired, lonely, and sometimes I wanted to give up. But whenever I felt weak, I would turn to God in prayer. I didn't ask for big things. I just whispered, "Please hold me. Please don't let me go back to the old path." And strangely, something always came at the right time to help me stand firm. Sometimes it was a Bible verse I happened to read. "My power is made perfect in your weakness." Sometimes it was a word of encouragement from a fellow inmate who had silently been observing me. "I see you're really different now. I don't know what you believe in, but it's good that you're keeping it up." These moments were like small lamps in the dark night. They didn't completely dispel the darkness, but they were enough for me to know I wasn't lost. I began to understand that faith is not a high emotional peak at the beginning, but a journey, and every journey has storms. But one thing is certain, after every storm passes, the roots of the seed of faith dig deeper into the ground. I was no longer afraid of the mockery as I was before. I realized that the suspicious eyes of others could not define me. The important thing was that God knew exactly where I was, how I was fighting, and He was not leaving me behind. And then one day, when someone asked me, "How do you handle the pressure here without getting angry?" I smiled and replied without any hesitation, "Because I is not alone anymore." Gradually, I became the person that other inmates sought out when they wanted to talk or ask for prayer. At first, it was just a few casual questions. "What are you reading?" Or "Do you really believe in this stuff?" But then, when one person went through a sleepless night because they missed home, another received news that their wife was divorcing them, or someone was beaten for a place to lie down, they came to me, not because I had power, but because I was willing to listen, without judgment, and to pray for them. We started meeting every evening, when the noise had subsided and the guards were patrolling in another area. There were only a few old Bibles, a few sheets of paper with Bible verses written in pencil, and quiet voices amidst the buzzing of mosquitoes. We read each verse slowly, letting the words sink into our hearts. Each person shared their life story, their mistakes, fears, and hidden wounds. Then we prayed for each other, not with flowery words, but with sighs, tears, and sincere requests for forgiveness. The strange thing was, even though the four walls around us were still cold, our hearts began to warm up. God was there, right in the middle of a place considered the bottom of society. In the eyes of those who were once desperate, I began to see a spark of light. Not the light of external freedom, but the light from within, a light that no one could extinguish. One day, a new inmate, with a face full of anger and his arms covered in tattoos, was brought to our room. He didn't talk to anyone, just sat sullenly in the corner. But one night when everyone was asleep, he came close to me and quietly asked, "Can you pray for me? I don't know why, but I can't sleep. My head is full of screams." I put my hand on his shoulder and we prayed in silence. That night, for the first time, he slept peacefully. Later, he told me that in his sleep, he saw himself standing in a green field, and a hand gently patted his shoulder and said, "You belong to me." From that day on, he also joined our small group. And so the group grew larger, and the four walls could not stop the gospel from spreading. Right in prison, a small community was built by God, where rejected people found a true family. I realized that God's light does not need a large space, nor does it wait for perfect circumstances. He can turn a prison into a church and sinners into living witnesses. And I knew that I was no longer living just for myself. I learned that living by faith does not depend on circumstances. Faith does not need a magnificent church, does not need pews with the smell of new wood, and does not need a peaceful atmosphere to exist. It can sprout in the most seemingly harsh places, like this very prison. In the beginning, I often asked myself, does God hear my prayers here? The four cold gray walls, the rusty iron bars, and the heavy smell of mold made everything seem distant. But then right here, I witnessed His power at work more strongly than ever before. There was an inmate named Hung, known for his violence. If someone said the wrong thing, he would immediately attack them. I remember the first time I approached him, he looked at me with eyes full of suspicion. "What do you want?" I smiled. Just wanted to ask if you're okay." He sneered and turned away, leaving me in silence. But then after many days, he started to sit and listen quietly when I shared about God during our small group meetings. One evening, he came to me, his voice trembling. "Can you pray for me?" The next day, Hung no longer cursed or fought. He started reading the Bible slowly, word by word, as if he was swallowing every drop of water in a desert. Then there was Tuan, a person who had almost lost all hope. His long prison sentence made him think that his life was over. He once said to me, "What's the point of living? Who will need me when I get out? Here, I'm just waiting to die." I remember holding his hand and saying that God still had a plan for him, even if he couldn't see it right now. We prayed for many nights in a row. One morning, he had his first genuine smile since he came to prison. He said, "I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know God is with me today." It was stories like these that made me believe that God's power transcends all iron bars. Faith cannot be locked up. It seeps through every crack, flooding into the darkest corners of the human soul. Living by faith in prison is learning to see the good in the bad, to see life in the darkness, and to see hope in despair. I realized that prison cannot hold those who are truly free in their souls, and that freedom only God can give. That day, the sunlight shone through the window bars, painting long streaks of light on the gray cement floor. I was sitting quietly in the corner, holding the old Bible, when the guard came in and handed me an envelope. "A letter from your family," he said briefly. I took it, my heart beating faster. It had been a long time since I had received any news from home. During my time here, I had sent many letters to my mother, but I never received a reply. Every time I put pen to paper, I just hoped she would read it and feel the repentance in every word. But deep down, I was still afraid that I had lost her love and trust forever. I tremblingly opened the envelope. A white piece of paper, my mother's familiar handwriting, appeared before my eyes. Right from the first line, I had to stop because my eyes were blurred with tears. "I forgive you. I believe you have changed." Just 8 words, but it was like a cool rain pouring down on the dry desert of my heart. I burst into tears, but they were not tears of shame or guilt. They were the tears of a person who knew he had truly been forgiven. I remembered the old years, the many times I had hurt my mother, the many wrong decisions that had plunged my life into darkness. At one point, I thought that even God could not forgive me. But now, between these 4 walls, I understood that His forgiveness does not depend on what I have done, but on the love He has for me. My mother's forgiveness was like a mirror reflecting a greater forgiveness from the Creator. He had forgiven me before I even knew I needed it. My mother was just following in His footsteps, opening her arms to embrace her once lost son. From the day I received that letter, every time I prayed, I always thanked God for letting me experience a profound truth. Forgiveness not only frees the one who is forgiven, but also heals the one who forgives. And when a heart is touched by grace, it can no longer live as it once did. I began to live each day in prison with a clearer purpose, to show that grace to those around me. I told my fellow inmates about my story, about God's love, about how He can renew anyone, no matter how dark their past. The day I was forgiven was not just a date on my calendar. It was a turning point, a milestone marking a new journey, a journey of inner freedom, even while my body was still in prison. And I knew that when the prison gates opened, I would walk out not with a soul full of guilt, but with a heart that had been cleansed, ready to live a new life, for Him and because of Him. That day finally came. After counting every rainy and sunny season through the bars, I heard my name called from the warden's office. My heart pounded. The final procedures were completed. A release certificate was placed in front of me. The heavy iron gate slowly opened, making its familiar creaking sound. But this time it rang out like a song of liberation. The light from outside flooded my eyes, dazzling but warm. The wind blew gently through my hair. The smell of earth, trees, and nature made me feel like I was breathing for the first time. I walked out step by step, each step a quickened heartbeat, both happy and trembling. But the strange thing was, I no longer felt the sense of escaping from prison like others who had dreamed of this day. Because I knew true freedom didn't start today. It had started the day I met God in the darkness of my cell. Before, I used to think freedom was being able to go anywhere and do anything I wanted. But during my years of imprisonment, I realized that some people, even with their bodies free, are still chained by hatred, addiction, lust, or a painful past. Conversely, there were also people, like me, who were locked within four walls, but whose souls were open, at peace, because they had been freed from sin. The day I walked out of prison, memories flooded back. I remembered the long nights of silent tears, the mornings reading the Bible in the thin sunlight that seeped through the bars, the times I prayed for a stubborn inmate to be changed. All of these things had prepared a new soul in me to live a different life. My mother was the first person I saw when I walked out the gate. She stood there, a small figure, but with eyes full of tears. We hugged each other tightly. I heard my mother's trembling voice. "You're home, truly home." I knew she wasn't just happy that I was out of prison, but because she saw me return from the abyss of sin. On that day, I not only regained my physical freedom, but also received a mission. I knew God had given me another chance to live, not to live for myself, but to live for Him. I no longer wanted to go back to my old life, no longer wanted to chase after the things that had led me into darkness. I wanted to use the rest of my life to tell people that no matter how tightly the chains of sin may bind, God can break them and give us true freedom. Freedom is not about not having iron bars in front of you. Freedom is when the heart is no longer bound by the past, when the soul finds peace, and when life is guided by the one who died and rose again for you. The day I was released from prison was just a milestone. The day I was truly free was the day I said to God, "I give my life to you." In the early days of joining groups, I was still feeling awkward. Many faces looked at me with suspicion. Perhaps they thought I was just someone who was religious for a while and would eventually go back to my old ways. But I didn't blame them. I used to be like that, skeptical of all good words, thinking everyone had a hidden agenda. I remember my first sharing session, my hands trembling as I held the microphone. I didn't know if my story would touch anyone, but when I saw a man in the back row bow his head and cry, I knew God was at work. I told them about my dark days, the agonizing addiction, the times I almost died, and then I talked about the moment He entered my life, pulling me from darkness into the light. I didn't speak with flowery words, I just spoke the truth. And it was the truth that had power. From then on, I got more involved. I started going to drug rehabilitation centers, detention homes, and recovery group meetings. I didn't just tell my story, I listened. I learned to be silent so that others could pour out their pain. Every time I heard someone say, "I thought my life was over, but now I want to try believing in God like you," I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My purpose was no longer to seek recognition or to atone for my past. My purpose now is to be a living proof of His love and forgiveness. I no longer live just for myself. I live to pass on the hope that I received. I realized that true freedom is not just about getting out of the four walls of a prison, but about being released from the invisible chains of sin, fear, and despair. And my purpose is to help others find that freedom. Now, whenever I tell my story, I don't try to emphasize the sins or stains of my past. Instead, I boast about His grace, the miraculous light that entered the darkest corners of my life. I want people to see not the old me, but the one who made everything new in me. Some people ask, "Why do you dare to tell all the bad things you've done?" I smile, because I know that story no longer belongs to me. It is a living proof, a mirror for others to see that no one is too far for God to reach. No one is too sinful for Him to forgive. No one is too broken for Him to mend. I once thought my life was a crumpled, ink-stained paper on which nothing more could be written except a period. But God did not throw away that paper. He turned it over and began to write again, with the handwriting of forgiveness, love, and hope. From stories that seemed meaningless, He turned them into a testimony to save others. Today I go to places I used to fear, rehab centers, prisons, the dark streets that many people avoid. But I go not to find myself again, but to find the people who are in the darkness I used to be in. I tell them about a God who found me when I was falling, who took my hand when I no longer wanted to live. And I see in their eyes sometimes just a very small spark, but it's enough for me to know that the seed of hope has been sown. My life now is not perfect, but it is a living testimony. I don't just believe in God because of books or sermons, but because I myself have been touched, redeemed, and transformed by Him. Every breath, every step is a testament that He is still at work. Looking back on the path I have traveled, I can clearly see that every wrong step, every wound, and even the moments that seemed like the end are all threads that God used to weave a new picture. I no longer live to seek value from the world, but to show His love and grace. My story continues because I believe that every day is a new page that God is writing, and I am just a witness to His redeeming power. If you are in the midst of darkness, do not believe that everything is over. God is still there, ready to step into your life story and turn it into a living testimony. Try coming to Him today. No need for fancy prayers, just a call from the heart. He will hear and He will answer. And who knows, your story might be a miracle for someone else tomorrow.